Hello, I just made you co-host,
Woohoo!
so you should be good.
Let's see. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing, Dr. Mackey?
India's a student.
Dr. Mackey, do you have the option to do polls within it? Because I'm not seeing that option at the bottom.
See, on more, let's see. Yes, I do have the option. On the bottom, I've got chat, share screen, and then
I wonder if
poll.
that only shows then for the host versus the co-host.
Can I make you host? Let's see. I can make you host.
Power!
Okay, let's try that and see.
I'll see if it pops up.
Okay, I just made you change host. Okay, now you're the host.
I have the power now.
And I don't anymore. That's great.
Let's see. I'm still not showing the polling option though.
It was near my share screen when I go on my commands at the bottom, like participants chat.
Yeah, that's where it, maybe, do I need to refresh it? Because that's where it was showing.
Try, because I had it until I made you host.
Okay, let's see.
It's not giving me the more option because, okay, now I see polling again on mine. Where did Brittany go? Oh, Brittany's gone. She'll be back. There she is. I wonder if I have to make her co-host again.
Take two.
Okay. So did it take away your polling? Because I have it again.
It did. Yeah, I was about to say, I'm back to just a normal.
Okay, so
person.
I can make you host or co-host. But the co-host did not work, did it?
April, did it let you when you were a co-host back when we tried it, let you? Oh no, it says your audio.
You're muted, April.
Try leaving and coming back. We can't hear you. Do I need to come next door? Hello? Were you calling in when we did it before?
Yes. There we go. We found it. Thanks.
Oh, yay, there you are.
Hey.
Okay,
Just
Brittany.
me calling Brittany. How are you, Dr. Mackey?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Let's try making me host and seeing if it'll pop up.
Okay, Brittany. Make host. Change host. Okay, now Brittany, you should see polling because it takes it away from me.
Yeah, I see security options. I see the participant list, chat, share screen, record, breakout rooms, reactions, and go live.
Do you have anywhere where it says more?
The more is only go live option. So live on Facebook, live on Workplace, live on YouTube, and live on custom streaming.
Okay.
But it worked before when I did a host this morning and I co-hosted with April, it was allowing her to do polls.
It's probably something to do with the UT security.
Yeah.
Just like I can't let guest speakers in anymore into my class.
Yeah.
I have to just start a whole new meeting. Even the Zoom team couldn't figure it out. Like, it's only UTK users. So I don't know. Can I do the polling for you?
You can if you want to, and I can tell you I'll make you the host again. And I'll email you the options.
Okay. charger.
Yeah, and April can say, hey, do a poll here.
Yes.
Hey, Dr. Mackey, can you
Yeah.
give April co-host access so she can share her screen?
Yes.
I can share it without.
Yeah, I think you can. Usually my students can share. That's one thing it doesn't
This must have
block.
been before then. The text message.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's that. Yeah, I texted you when I couldn't talk.
Just kidding then. She's good.
Okay. To get to my charger. Okay. Yeah, I can do polling. Let's see.
This is Susie. Hello, Susie.
Hey everybody.
Hi,
Hello, how are
Susie.
you?
April. Good. Hi, Dr. Mackey.
Hi there.
April, I just finished a meeting with my director and I got to do like one thing. So I'm going
All
to
good.
mute. I'm going to
It's all good. No, I just saw you pop in, so I see you.
Okay.
I'm not sure we have someone else with us on video, but it says Novelis Conference.
Okay.
We're very glad to have everyone today. So join us this morning. And Dr. Mackey, you just let us know when you're ready to get started.
Okay, I'm trying to add these questions, but it's not working. It says add question, but then it just takes me to another Zoom meeting. Like, goes back.
There should be an option to edit. That's how I did it before, like in the
Yeah.
top right. It like took me online and then I could add one question at a time.
Okay. It just keeps opening up meeting information.
It's okay. We'll work around it.
I'm
Work around
sorry. I'll
Just
try
had them in this
while you're
morning,
talking.
so it's all good. So we'll check in periodically and see if we have them set up. And
Okay.
if we do, that's
I'll
great.
try
And if
again.
not, that's okay too.
Edit. Hmm. Yeah, whenever you're ready, April, if you want to go ahead and get started, that's
I think, yeah. Whenever, are we good to go?
Brittany.
Yeah, we should. It looks like I'm getting a list of who signed up. We might wait a couple more minutes to let the rest
Okay.
of the people get in here
Okay.
and then start.
I'll try with the questions again. Add question. Edit. Okay. It's got to be enabled. Maybe that's it. Oh, there it is.
All right, we're gonna wait about 1 more minute, just to make sure everyone is able to get in, and then we should be good to go.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Brittany, you just let us know when everybody's in and we're set. And Brittany, you can see everything. You see the presentation up.
Yep, everything is looking good. You are good. We've got most people in here, so we can go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, good afternoon, or good, well, not afternoon yet. Good morning. So welcome to ETCBA Compensation 101. We want to thank everybody for joining us today and taking the time to talk with that or to learn with us about compensation and different practices for market pay and overall compensation philosophies. So as we go through, just to get started, I want to introduce myself. You can see me on video if you've got that pulled up, but I'm April Moore. I'm the membership chair for ETCBA. I also manage compensation for Covenant Health. I've been in the field of HR for about 18 years now, working in all different types of fields from recruitment to employee relations and engagement, as well as payroll, HRIS, just a little bit of everything. So I'm glad to be here with you all this morning talking about compensation. So as we get started, I want to start out by telling you a little bit about what we'll discuss. As we go through the presentation today, we're going to talk about market pay as well as salary surveys and how to use those to help identify your compensate or your market and how you should be compensating for positions. We'll talk a little bit about job evaluations and the importance of those in your compensation studies, as well as pay equity and how to address those situations as they come up in your organization, because I know that's a challenge we all face today. So as we get started, let's talk about what is comp. And compensation is basically your total rewards package. When you're looking at compensation, one thing to think about is it's everything that you're giving an employee to help incentivize them to come into work. And so that includes both your direct and indirect compensation. So when you think of direct compensation, it's the monetary reward that you give to your staff. And that can be anything from their salary, bonuses, tips, commissions, any type of variable pay or incentive pay that you give to your staff for the work that they provide. Indirect compensation includes things such as your benefits, 401k, tuition assistance. Those type programs are also part of the compensation package in that when you look at everything, you should look at as a whole. And your employees will feel the value and reward of the compensation programs that you have because it incentivizes them to come in. So you want to make sure that when you're designing your compensation packages, that you're looking at programs that are competitive and help you and attract the talent, attract and retain the talent that you have for the positions that you have within your organization. And I think today we have a variety of different organizations with us. So we're kind of going to talk about some examples as we go through and look at some things that will hopefully be applicable to all of your companies. So let's start by talking about market pay. What is it and how do you find it? Because market pay can seem like something that's overwhelming. I know we've all had questions come to us about the employee went online and found information related to salary and they want to know why we don't pay them the rate that they found on salary.com. Or a manager asks us, what should I pay for this position that I have open? And how do I determine the rate? And what are our competitors paying? So ultimately, the market is determining what those rates are. So if you're paying at market, it means that you're paying at a level that matches the market average for the salary for a specific job. And so the market rate can be used to determine the appropriate salary for a new employee, the pay rate for a group of positions, and help determine the overall compensation philosophy for your organization. So over the course of time, the market rate does change, and we've seen that recently, especially with COVID. So the market rate is going to be the average position or the average rate that's paid for a position out in the world, wherever you're competing with for your talent. So as we look at that, positions like entry-level positions are a good example. Economic factors drive the pay rate for jobs. So as you're looking at entry-level positions, with the beginning of COVID, we saw a big change in how those positions were paid. We saw that a lot of our entry-level positions or the positions in food service or grocery stores had big increases in pay rates, as well as bonus structures set up because the demand for those jobs in the beginning of the pandemic. The economic factors that drove those rates up and the situation in our world that drove the rates up is changing. And now we're seeing that level out a little bit. So it's important to understand that the market can change, because now we're seeing situations where those positions have rates that are being reduced, or there's layoffs in some industries and areas. So we want to talk today as well about how to be responsive to those market fluctuations. So how do you determine who your market is? Your market can be determined based on your industry and who you're competing with. So when you're looking to see, look to see what jobs you're recruiting for and where you're recruiting for those positions from. So are you able to bring in entry-level talent that you can go and recruit from local high schools or other organizations? Are you able to bring people in that have specialized skill sets? And that's going to be a different market that you have to recruit from. So it's going to look a little different if you're recruiting a food service worker compared to a specialized engineer, and because the markets for those are different in the area. So that's a key question to ask yourself when determining your market. Also, is it a position you can recruit from locally? Is this something we have here in Knoxville or in East Tennessee? Or is it a specialized position you're recruiting for that you're going to have to go outside of the area to find? So if you have to go to Nashville or Atlanta or New York to find a special IT position that maybe we don't have those resources here, you want to make sure that you're able to compete with talent from the different areas. Also, what skill sets do you need for the positions? Some skill sets you need special degrees, you need special licenses or certifications to be able to perform the work. Being able to recruit for those specialized positions is going to require it may require a different pay rate than what you're looking for if you're looking for positions that are a little easier to recruit in our area. Also, as you're looking to determine your market, consider who may be recruiting your employees away. If you, who are you losing your employees to, and why are they going there? And if you find that you're constantly losing employees because of pay rates, then it's probably time to reconsider your compensation practices. Now, I say that with the caveat that sometimes we're going to lose employees and they're going to go other places for a little more money, but it's a balance. If you see that you have a trend, then that's the time that we probably need to look at what your compensation philosophy is. So be aware that pay is an easy reason to claim for employees leaving. Exit interviews and stay interviews are a great way to determine the true reason for them leaving. And so you will find in those conversations that sometimes there are other factors besides pay that cause your employees to leave. So keep that in mind as you're looking at changing your compensation practices, because as HR, we need to be strategic partners with our leaders in order to make sure that we are keeping our budget in line, because compensation is something that can quickly get out of line or cause our budget to get out of line. So if we respond every time somebody leaves for $1 more by increasing everybody else $1 more, it's just going to be a vicious cycle that we go through. But we want to make sure that we're responsive if we continue to see it being an issue, that we respond with pay accordingly. And also, sometimes an employee, if they're looking for more money, they're going to continue, to look, even if you give them that pay increase. It can just be a temporary Band-Aid for an underlying problem if you always respond with compensation increases when employees are leaving. So keep that in mind as you're looking at your market. So why does all of this even matter? So ensuring that you have the right programs in place is key to being able to attract and retain talent in your organization. If you're not able to compete for talent, then other factors in the organization will be affected, like your quality, your productivity, employee satisfaction. So compensation does have an effect on all of those pieces. It also ensures that your pay is fair and it helps alleviate a risk that you may have in your organization due to fair pay practices. And we'll talk about that as we go through this today as well. So I know this is a lot to take in, so we're going to do this a little different. And Dr. Mackey is setting us up for our first polling question. Thank you, Dr. Mackey. And so we're going to look at an example today and walk through how we would address this example in each piece of the pay philosophy we're talking about. So looking at the situation and the example we have is we have an increase in the amount of work in our organization. So we're looking to hire a new accountant. The position will be working with a senior accountant who's been with the company for 15 years. And you notice a trend that the candidates for the positions are asking for a rate closer to what your senior accountant is making, but they all have less experience. So Dr. Mackey, do you have our first question ready? Perfect. So let's look at this and say, I want you all to weigh in and say, where should we recruit for our accounting position? So if you all could take just a minute to check the boxes and weigh in, we'll give you just a second and then get your feedback. All right. So Dr. Mackey, do we have feedback in? I can't hear you.
I'm muted. Okay, let me see. I'll share my screen.
There should be a button to share your results at the bottom of the poll.
It says end poll.
Yes, so end it and then you can share.
Okay. Share results. Gotcha. Okay. Now can you guys see that?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, great. So for our accountant position, you all are right on track. We have accountants in our area, and so we know that we can find accountants here in Knoxville. We don't need to go outside. We don't need to go look to see what Seattle, Washington is paying for accountants, because we know there's a difference in the cost of living in Seattle and what those rates may look like compared to ours. So as we're looking for who we're going to recruit from, that's a good way to see where we need to be pulling in data from as we're looking at salary surveys. So financial organizations in our area, new college graduates, as well as other companies in our industry, because we know position is an accountant, it's not at a senior level. So as we walk through this today, we're going to have several different stops that we're going to make in the process with our accountant and talk through the data that we have available for the position and ways to determine an appropriate pay rate for new and current employees. And the items we're going to discuss will all tie back into this case study, and so hopefully that'll help kind of break this up a little bit and help you all see how the process works as we look for this position. So Dr. Mackey, I'm going to close our poll and go on to our next slide. Okay. So we have this market data, and market data is something that we talk about, and it's this market that's out there, but how do we find it? And how do we know what our market is? Because we hear it a lot, but how do you know where to go to get it? The market data, I was telling Brittany earlier, it sounds like we have Market Square in Knoxville, but it's not quite the same thing. So market data comes to us from salary data from different resources across the industry. Salary data you get can help ensure that your pay is fair for each position, and it'll help align your jobs with what the market is. So market data can be found in a lot of locations. Some IT databases that you can purchase have that as a part of the services they provide. So there are some vendors out there that you can work with to have a compensation program that will provide you market data and help you compile that data to determine the right midpoints for your job or the right market rates for the job. Also, data can be found online for a lot of positions. Now, if you choose to use data from a website, I would say to be cautious, because you want to make sure that you know where the data is coming from. So most surveys will provide you a list of participants so you can see who's providing the data, or they'll let you know if the data is self-reported. If there's no source listed for the data, I would say be very cautious because you don't know where that data is coming from. Companies will provide data into salary survey reports so that you can ensure that the data you have is in line with what the company's paying. Sometimes data that's self-reported can be inflated and not account for everything, or someone's rolling things in with their pay rate, maybe a differential or a bonus that drives up what looks like their base rate. So make sure that you're careful if you're using data online off of third-party webs or off of websites that are not true salary surveys. But there are third-party vendors that will conduct annual surveys to gather data and a list of those positions, or for a list of positions, and provide it to companies to either participate or purchase the information. So the best sources of data do come from the third-party vendors, and we'll get into why that is here in just a few minutes. They gather the data and consolidate it and report it back in a summary format. So you're not seeing data for each individual position for each individual company. It'll average together for you so you can see what the averages are for the same position across the industry. The surveys can be industry specific. They can be large surveys. They can, Willis Towers Watson, Mercer, they do surveys that cover every position that you can think of in the United States and in the world. So when you look for surveys, some things that you want to consider would be your cost, your industry, and again, where that data comes from. So there are local organizations, or you may have some organizations that are specific to your industry that conduct annual surveys. You want to look at those and say, which ones work best for you? Is it something you need that's specific to your industry? For our accountant, we may not want to go out if we're just hiring one accountant and purchase a salary survey for a financial institution. But most places will be able to, or most places will have an accountant job description in a survey that you may consider, even some that are specific to your industry. The surveys that are provided by local organizations are sometimes free if you participate, or they don't have much of a cost like some of the larger surveys. Surveys can range in cost from nothing, you can get the data for free if you participate, up to tens of thousands of dollars. So the Bureau of Labor and Statistics is another good example. They have free survey data on their website. So if you don't have a budget where you could go and get salary survey data, that's another free source you could consider. With many salary surveys, you also have the option to purchase a module or a piece of the survey data that may apply to your company. So for example, like I mentioned, Mercer and Willis, they have large surveys, but you can purchase a cut of that data for a lesser cost that may be specific to your industry or to the positions that you have available. So before determining what surveys you should purchase, you want to make sure to consider the job data that's available in the survey as well as the fit for your position. So you can look at the job descriptions for the data that will be provided, as well as the industry or how this may work for you, because you don't need a survey to cover every position all over the world. Then you may need just a smaller cut that works for your company that better fits in with your budget. And again, as you're looking to purchase them, consider your budget, how it aligns with your company's compensation philosophy, and the sources of the data. And also, some companies may find that it's more cost effective to purchase an IT system that will provide the data to you. So, and you also can get, as I mentioned earlier, a discount or free data if you participate in surveys, and we'll talk about what survey participation looks like in just a minute. If you have the time and capacity to participate, it's often worth the discount that you'll receive. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at data. Sometimes it's worth that extra time for the extra money you'll save. So, and again, look at the jobs that are included. Make sure that they align with what you need, because you don't want to waste time or money participating in a survey that may not align with your organization or your needs. So when you participate in a salary survey, you'll be asked to provide information about your company, and it's always helpful to pull the information together beforehand. So you can open the survey and look to see what they're going to ask you for, and bring that together so you can sit down and complete it in one setting. The position, they're going to ask you for information on positions. They'll have job descriptions that you'll want to match your employees to. They will give you a summary of that. Some will ask for an average pay rate for an accountant. Again, back to our example, they may ask for average accountant pay by level in your organization, or they may ask for individual information. Now, they're not going to ask you to give the name of the person, but they may ask for you to provide information on the employee's classification and their rate of pay. The data would be mapped to the jobs to make sure that it's the appropriate job description. You want to make sure that's right. And it can be reported by level. Also in the survey, some things that may seem surprising that they'll ask you for are the count of your employees. How many employees do you have? What are your anticipated pay increases? What bonuses and differential programs do you have, as well as your benefit structure? The revenue and company financial data is also something you'll be asked about in a salary survey, as well as your compensation budget. But the nice thing about when you provide this information is it also comes back in the data cuts that you have available. So in a salary survey, and we'll look in a few minutes about an example of a data cut, that will show it by geographic region. You can also look at data by revenue or by position type. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at the data, and that ties in with what you provide in the survey. The information they're asking you about your compensation budget can also help you plan for future pay increases for your employees, because they'll report back on that information so you can see what the industry is doing in terms of trends for compensation increases. I'm not sure if you're familiar or if you see in SHRM emails, World at Work and Mercer do annual compensation increase surveys, and you'll see the data, compensation budgets are going up 2.5%. That some of that data, they do a specific survey for that, but it's also stuff that would be reported in the general surveys as well. When you participate in a survey, know that they typically come out in first quarter of a year, and you'll be given about a month to respond. If it's a bigger survey, they may give you a little longer. And they typically come out with the results in the July-August timeframe. Now with COVID response, we have seen a little bit of difference in that. Some of the surveys were delayed this year, and some surveys are starting to do quarterly surveys instead of annual surveys. And that's to help make sure they have the data refreshed, because everything is changing so much. And if you use an IT system for your data, they will use a combination of salary surveys, and sometimes they'll use information provided by their members to be able to give salary data. And it's updated in compliance with the antitrust laws, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So I should have mentioned as we got started, if you all have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box today, and we'll answer them as we get through and wrap up at the end. So if you have any questions, definitely let us know. So talking about the Sherman antitrust laws, and this is something that seems a little different and kind of is a little puzzling when you look at it and think of HR, because normally for us, when we think about our laws that govern how we pay employees, we think of the FLSA, which that's still an important part of what we do. But when we look at the FLSA, there's also, to govern how we do our pay practices, how we set our pay rates is also governed by the Sherman Antitrust Act. The Sherman Antitrust Act was developed to preserve competitive business environment, and it disallows price fixing or wage fixing. And so what that means is it limits how much information we can exchange and our ability to share data with each other. And it puts parameters around what we can and can't do to get salary information. So a lot of times we hear people say, well, I called so-and-so and they told me that, their start rate for this position is $13. Or, I had a friend tell me that they just hired an accountant and paid them $75,000. In those examples, that's not true data that we can use to help set our pay and our pay rates. So I caution, if that's a practice that you have in your organization, you might want to reevaluate that. The data that we receive, the Department of Justice has provided some guidelines around how we have to apply the Antitrust Act to our salary reviews. And they say, based on their guidelines, that the data should be collected from a neutral third party, where HR should not conduct a formal an informational salary survey on their own. The reason that data should come to us from a third party is so that it looks like, or so that there's not a possibility that we are setting our rates to align with or try to outprice our competitors. The data also must be at least 3 months old for the report to come into us. They must come from at least 5 companies, with no individual company representing more than 25% of the data. And the data cannot reflect the identity or provide the identity of the information or of the company that provided the information. So early on, I mentioned when you participate in a salary survey, you'll probably receive a list of the companies that participated, but you won't receive any information on the specific company's data. And so it will be given to you in a format where you won't be able to tell who's provided the information. And so data results can only be shown in an aggregate form. And so they can't provide individual data out on a salary survey for an individual person that they receive data for. So as you're looking at that, again, I caution, and I can't say it enough, because of those rules that are around how we can gather data, if you're needing to get data for a position, make sure to use the sources that are available to you, whether it's, like I mentioned, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics reports. It could be information you're receiving, a candidate tells you they are looking for a certain rate for a job, but make sure you're not calling around to ask for pay in order to determine what type of rate you should offer for a position. And as mentioned earlier, we want to ensure that the data that you receive, self-reported data is another thing to be careful with, because when you get into certain websites, if you can't find out where the information is coming from, or it's not clear that it's coming from a company, make sure that you're very cautious with that information, because I can go out online and say, I'm a compensation manager and make $1 million a year, and there's nothing that stops that. And I mean, that's not an appropriate rate, but there's nothing to stop that from being reported online. So if you're using that as a baseline, it can create issues for you in terms of your compensation structures and philosophies, as well as create equity issues for you and your organization. So Dr. Mackey, I'm going to turn it back to you, and we're going to go back to our accountant, and we have another question. Because we've talked about our salary surveys and determined what we can't, or we've determined what we can and can't do. So let's see, get your all's input. What options should we consider for salary data for our accountant position? So if you'll take just a minute to give us some feedback. Dr. Mackey, do you have it in? All right, perfect. So yeah, so you can, as we talked about, look at online searches, just be cautious with those. Purchasing surveys is the great or the best way to get your data in, or just purchase for free salary surveys. Calling a friend who just hired an accountant, thank you for not. And then, requested rates from candidates. That is still something you can consider, because you're going to want to know what your candidate's asking for the job. I wouldn't base your market or base your pay rate or your overall compensation philosophy on what candidates ask for, but it is something that is okay to consider as you're looking to set pay for a job. So now we've got our accountant, we have our position, we've determined what our market is, where we're going to get our data, and our data is coming in and we're looking at it. It's been a few months, we've got all of our information back. And so, actually it's not been a few months yet. So now we're going to do an evaluation, because the other piece of this is you want to make sure that you understand the job that you are recruiting for. And so as you're looking at the positions that you have, and this is an accountant, I know most of us have accountants, but it could be any job you have in your organization. You want to make sure that as you're gathering data for the position, that you have a good understanding of what the role is and that the job is clearly evaluated. Because one thing we see is that positions we don't always have updated information, or we just assume that we know what the jobs are. So when we're evaluating positions, there are a lot of ways to make the process run smoothly and to help make it more efficient and get an accurate job description for your company. So first, you want to make sure that you're reviewing the job responsibilities. When you're doing that, start by talking with your managers, the person who has the position reporting to them. They know the job and they can help you understand what the role is and what their expectations are for the job. Also, make sure that you learn the expectations for the role. What do they need to have? What are the minimum qualifications? Do you need somebody that has a degree, or is that just preferred? Can you bring somebody in entry level, or do you need to have several years of experience? Work with them to find that out. Also, take the time to meet with the employee. They can tell you if you have an employee that's already in the role or that has been in the role before, they can tell you what the job responsibilities are and help you understand the day-to-day more than what we can understand just here in our office, and even sometimes more than what the manager sees. Now, keep in mind as you go through that evaluation with the employee, you want to wrap everything back up with your manager to make sure those expectations are in line. Now, right now, going and spending time with an employee face-to-face, working side-by-side, job shadowing every day may be a little difficult with COVID, but you can do Zoom conversations with them. You can do phone interviews to learn about the job and do a thorough evaluation. And always make sure that your evaluation is unbiased. There's a lot of times that we work with positions and think we know what they do or what the role is, but make sure to take the time to listen, because sometimes there's a little more going on with a position than what we may be aware of. And also, again, make sure the manager weighs in on the final review and that you're on the same page with them as you're evaluating a job. Now, as you're also evaluating a job, make sure you're considering the exemption status for the position. On the FLSA website, if you're not familiar with that, you can find copies of the duties test that allow employees to be exempt or non-exempt. You always want to make sure you have them in the right status as you're looking for or looking at a position. And, one thing I say as you're writing a description is it should be specifically generic, because you want to make sure it's specific to the job you have, but generic enough that you don't box yourself into where you can only have that one person ever in the position. It truly needs to be specific to what the job is, but generic enough that it is what you can bring in to the position at the bottom, and then you can prefer up from there. Make sure, again, that you review your duties test and also consider how the position you're evaluating compares to others in the organization. Most companies don't have individual job descriptions for each person. You may in your organization, if that's how you choose to have your job descriptions, that's fine. That's what works for your business and your culture. But some facilities and some companies have positions that are banded together. So, for example, there may be a job of an HR generalist or specialist, and within that classification, you also have a compensation analyst, a benefits analyst, a recruiter, a generalist that's truly in the field working in HR. So when you combine several different positions into one classification and have one classification title for multiple different functions, that's where job banding comes in. So the pay for the position would be based on the market for the person in that band and the pay scale, but a pay grade could cover all of that for the individual. And we'll talk a little bit about how pay grades work here in just a few minutes. So Dr. Mackey, we're going to jump past job evaluations and turn it back to you, because now we're going to talk about our accountant again and talk about doing a job evaluation for our accountant. So who all should be involved? Okay, Dr. Mackey, I'll let you turn it. Okay, all of the above, exactly. So we want to make sure we're partnering to be able to be strategic in our evaluations, that we are looking at getting everyone involved that needs to be involved in the assessment to get the most accurate job evaluation completed. So in the case of our accountant, we have our senior accountant who's there. This accountant position is a new role for us. So you can spend time with the manager as well as the senior accountant to learn about what the job will be, and then circle back with the manager at the end to make sure that you have his feedback as well on what the overall job would be. So now, and I'm going to preface this with the data, and this is not accurate, but I want you to see a sample of what a salary survey would look like as it comes back to you. So for our accountant position, I can get my slides to go down here. Here's an example of what salary survey data may look like as it comes back to you from one group. So we've done our evaluation as we're waiting on this to come in, and here's what accountant data is. Well, we all know that minimum wage is $7.25, so the data in this is not accurate. It's just used to show you as an example. But as you're looking at the salary survey data as it comes in, you'll see cuts that are based on geography, where you can see, is it national data? Is it Southeast? Is it based in Tennessee or Knoxville? You'll also see the job title, and you'll see the job description for the position as well when the data comes back to you, and the job code. The job code's helpful if you completed a salary survey to help you map to where the job that you match to this position is. It also, if you have an IT system that helps you with compensation analysis, you can map those in through those job codes. It will show you in the salary survey the number of incumbents or the number of employees that are in those classifications that have been reported on, as well as the number of organizations who responded. And so you can see in the data that if you look at the percentiles and you see that there's a low number of participants and organizations, you may have to look at one that has a little bit more response. So in the case of the accountant in Tennessee, we don't see as many responses for the general accountant as we do the senior. So that's just something you'll want to keep in mind. Also, it will give you information on the 25th percentile. And what that is for the position, that's typically around a grade minimum, but it could be a little more or less than that for the minimum, but that shows you the low end of the range. The median will show you the true midpoint of the market, and the average will show the average of all incumbents who were reported on. The 75th percentile will then show you the upper end of the range, so you can kind of see how those flow and what the spread of the range is for different companies and organizations, or for the companies that responded. So in the example you see here, you may also notice in salary survey data that comes back to you that there are some that are left blank. And so if that's the case, that's because there is not enough response from organizations for the data to be considered valid or to be reported on. So that's, if you see a blank data, in this case for Knoxville, an accountant, there just wasn't enough reported, you may want to go up to look at the Tennessee rate for an accountant to be able to see what an accountant in Tennessee should make. So as we get the data back, we want to start to look at how that data is going to affect our jobs. And that's when we look at market data and job evaluations and combining both of those pieces to determine what the rate should be. So up to this point, we've talked individually about getting our data, we've talked about our evaluation, but when we come together with our jobs and mapping them, we're going to look at that description that we've worked with our managers to develop and how we determine the pay rate for those positions. So companies can choose to use the data that's available to set the rate or to determine the appropriate grade for the job. It'll also help you determine the appropriate incentives you offer. One thing that I didn't show in the salary survey report example on the previous slide is there could be information on bonuses or differential structures that are available for those positions as well. So it'll help you determine your rate and the overall comp that you want to offer for the position. So when you use salary surveys, you should have at least 3 surveys in your library to ensure that you have valid information. So we get that question a lot about how many survey sources do we really need, and 3 helps you ensure your data is valid. That way you can make sure if you have a data point that comes in very high or very low, that you have some other to help balance it out. Also, you want to evaluate the jobs to determine the appropriate grade. When you're reviewing the job descriptions, make sure you're matching by responsibilities and that you're not matching by job title. I was working on a position the other day where someone called and asked for a specific job, and when I looked in the market for that job, I couldn't find it. It wasn't anywhere to be out there. So I had to contact back to the manager and say, help me understand what the roles are, help me understand the responsibilities. And then in that case, we were able to go out and identify that the job title that we use within our company was nowhere near what the market called the position. But we were able to find the data just by having that conversation about responsibilities. So matching by title can sometimes skew what you're looking at. When you match a job, we make sure you remember that not all positions are going to be 100% match. Your organization has jobs that are unique to you. And so you don't want to go out, and you're not going to be able to go out and find every specific job that you have within your organization at 100% match. You want to have a match that's at least 75% of the job responsibilities that your position has. You also want to make sure that if a position has multiple responsibilities, that you pull data from the different area or the different job descriptions that are included in that job. So for example, if your accountant is also over safety, you would want to pull in safety data with your market data to make sure that you're accounting for all of those responsibilities for your employee. As you saw in the previous slide, when you get your data, you can look at it by geography. You can also look at it by company size and revenue. That goes back to the questions they're going to ask when you participate in the surveys. You have to have, again, at least 5 sources of data, or a survey has to have at least 5 responses in order to provide the data. And if that's not available, like in this previous slide with the example of our accountant, if the data is not available in Knoxville, you may have to go to the Tennessee data and say, okay, this is what Tennessee says. Or you may need to look at the senior accountant and say, well, Tennessee didn't have that many, so what does the senior accountant pay? And then adjust that data based on the geography or the scope. And so if you're going to adjust it by scope, you can adjust it depending, 5 to 10% down, depending on the overall scope. And the geography information to adjust on that will be provided in your survey. So at the beginning of your survey, it'll tell you, Tennessee pays a certain percentage of the national average, or Knoxville pays a certain percentage of the national average. So you'll want to look at that as you're evaluating that data. So now that you've got your data in, you can use that to help determine your salary ranges. If you have salary ranges currently set up at your company, that's a good thing. If you don't, that's okay as well. But the pay ranges and the pay scales can also, if you don't use that philosophy, you can also just use it to help determine what your pay rate would be for the job. Pay grades are ranges for a position that can be across your organization. They set a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum pay rate for a job, and the midpoint should typically align with the market for the job. So multiple jobs can be in the same grade and can be banded jobs like we talked about earlier, or positions that have similar market midpoints. So for example, if you find that your accountant has the same midpoint as a HR specialist and industrial engineer, and I'm not saying that I think that that's what those are, I'm just coming up with titles for you, but they could all be in the same pay grade. You want to use the way you would differentiate pay them within that grade would be based on experience. So if you're hiring someone in that's a new grad, they may come in, or with less experience, they may come in lower in the grade compared to someone who's been performing in the role for quite some time, or is independent in the role, that would be coming in at market. And then if you have someone who has a significant amount of experience or certifications, they may be paid higher in that range. And a good rule of thumb as you're looking at your pay ranges is for about a 30 to 40% width of your pay range. And what that means is that the bottom of the range is about 15 to 20% below what the market midpoint is, or what your market average that we saw in our survey is. And the top of the range is about 15 to 20% above that. You want to give your employees room that they can move in your pay grades, and your pay grades can overlap, because by having pay grades overlap, it makes it easier for employees to promote and move from one level to the other. And so to determine your grades, again, you want to review your market data for the positions, but sometimes that data may not be available. Sometimes you may have a position that's unique to you, or you may decide that you want to pay a little more than what the market says for a specific job. If that's the case, you could just slot that position within the grade and decide on what that pay would be based on your compensation philosophy. If a job is unique to your company, or you have a hard time recruiting it, you're going to have to go, say there's a position that you need to have here, that the only place you can recruit for it is a specific industry on the West Coast. You may have to look at that rate and say, we know we're going to have to pay a little more than what we would typically pay in East Tennessee for a job, because we have to recruit. And so you can slot that at a higher grade. So your market data and pay ranges should be reviewed on a regular cycle. Reviewing the data annually or as your survey results is received is very helpful. It makes sure the grades keep moving with the market and prevents the need to continue to regrade jobs as the market changes. So it's helpful to make sure that employees also don't top out quickly. So you want to make sure that you're also reviewing those grades. You're making sure that you're moving them as you need to. Otherwise, they'll become stagnant and you'll see all of your employees top out. And at that point, you have to decide, what is it that you want to do with your staff. Are you just going to freeze their pay? But ultimately, you want to make sure that that you're reviewing those on a regular basis. But again, reviewing them and making sure that the data continues to increase and it wasn't just a temporary adjustment like what we saw earlier in the conversation about rates due to COVID. So you also may need to individually review your pay grades if you start to see turnover, if you're not able to recruit, or when you add new positions into a job or into the organization, you'll want to evaluate your grades at that point as well, just to make sure that something's not out of line. So as you're looking at compensation practices and philosophies, you may also want to consider things such as a set start rate for a job. You may have an organizational philosophy that you want to bring everyone in at a certain rate, that's above minimum wage. We hear Amazon says $15. That's, or certain other places say different rates. So that's something you may want to consider. Also, step increases or something. If you have a lot of positions that don't seem to progress through their pay range very quickly, that may be something you want to consider. That would give an employee a pay increase in a different incrementally throughout the course of a year, instead of having to wait until a certain annual increase or merit adjustment if that's what your company does. Another thing to consider as you're looking at compensation is differentials. Do you want to pay your employee extra for coming into work after hours or weekends to be able to staff those shifts? Some organizations see that as a benefit for their employees, and it helps them to cover those difficult to fill shifts. And maybe a bonus structure. In terms of overall compensation philosophy, if your company is based on production, or there's certain retention incentives or goals that you want to set, that may be something to consider to help drive performance and keep it in line with the organization and your business needs. So as we're looking at compensation philosophies and setups, we're going to refer back to Dr. Mackey one more time and get her to give us another question. So we've reviewed our accountant, we've gone through and we've got our market data in, and now we've determined that the individual that's coming in the job, we have a rate for our new accountant position based on what the market says. And so as a part of this, though, should we also review the rate for our senior accountant? Because we've seen that there's some compression in there, that we see that our candidates are asking about what he's making. So what are your thoughts? What should we do with our senior accountant? Okay, and Dr. Mackey, I know we're getting close on time, so I'm going to let you go ahead and close it out for us. Yeah, exactly. We want to make sure that our pay is fair and that we keep everything in line for our employees. And it's a great opportunity as we're looking at this new job to also look at our accountant, our senior accountant as well. So when you're doing an equity review, one thing that you want to look at is compression, and look at compression with your equity. And so what causes this? What causes your equity to get out of line? Ideally, your employees have been there with you, they've continued to grow, you've given them pay increases every year, but then something seems to be off, or employees that are coming in are asking more, or maybe somebody just makes a rate that seems out of line. There are a lot of things that can cause equity issues. They can be caused by our hiring practices. It could be that rates have increased and we've had people that have been with us for a very long time and the market has just changed, but their rates haven't caught up. It could be that we have had some poor hiring practices, or that there's performance issues that someone that's been in the position for quite some time has had that's pushed them lower than some of your other staff. And I know we're all familiar with gender equality. It could be related to something in terms of gender or other fair pay issues. So how should you address when you have an equity concern? First, I would recommend doing an annual review of your employees and their equity and how they all fit within the classifications. You also want to know your employees. Make sure that you know their experience, their performance. I know that it seems like a lot when you have many employees in your organization, but try to have an idea, because there's more. And if you don't know, talk to the managers or the leaders to get that information. There are oftentimes, it's easy to see on a spreadsheet what data looks like it should be, but there's always more to that story. So make sure you understand what's going on with with the individuals if you see something out of line. And then make sure that you're talking with your leadership team, knowing your jobs, to make sure that employees are classified correctly. Sometimes people are in a position that's just not right for them. So talk through all those things, get the information, and make sure that you have that understanding. And if something's out of line, work with your leaders to determine how you may need to adjust that. When you're looking at equity adjustments or making pay rate changes or changes to the overall philosophy and how you're going to recruit or retain your staff, make sure that you look at what the cost is going to be and how you're going to be able to address those gaps within your budget, as well as how long it will take. What's your timeline to get it turned around? If you find issues, is this an immediate thing that you need to fix? If so, how do you get the employees to the market? Also, what's your justification? If you're hiring employees in at rates that are higher than your current staff, make sure that you understand why and you can explain why, and that you have a plan to address the other employees if there's an issue there. The question I ask a lot is it worth hiring somebody in at a rate that's higher than your current staff and losing other employees because of something you offered to one candidate? So make sure that you understand that. And if you find that it's not worth paying that higher rate, then how are you going to hire for your positions? And it could be that you say you're going to hire in line with the equity in the groups that you have. It could be that you have a unique skill set you have to hire into. But make sure you're considering all of those factors as you're looking at each individual in the job and each offer you're making. So we're going to go back to our accountant and talk about him one more time. We don't have any more questions for him today, but now that we've made it through, we found that there is some compression between our senior accountant and the individual we have to hire. So if you find that you've got someone with less experience asking for about the same rate, about $5,000, or whatever that rate is, closer to the person with 15 years of experience, make sure you determine the plan of action for the senior accountant. If get manager feedback, job responsibilities, experience, and determine the best course of action. Because if there's performance issues that cause lower increases, it may be a little easier to say, okay, we understand why we have this compression, but then it could be that you need to make some adjustments. And if that happens, work with your leadership team to determine how you need to address that within your organization, or if you need to hire in at a lower rate. Now, while the example that we've looked at today is just for one employee, I do know that many organizations have that, and it crosses a lot of people in a lot of positions. So make sure that you are looking at pay fairness as you are looking at offering for jobs, as well as retaining for jobs and recruiting for positions. So that's a key part of what we do in HR. So just a couple of quick things to wrap up today, because as with any conversation, when you talk about pay, we have to talk about the FLSA. We've talked about exemption status. Make sure you're considering that as you're setting the grades for your job. Also, make sure you're looking at, as you're looking at exemption, what does your overtime compensation look like? One thing to know is we're talking about the FLSA and just overall compensation. We think overtime is just time and a half, but it's not true time and a half. When you're calculating overtime, you have to account for all the payments that you give to your employees, including differentials and bonuses that they may have received in the week that they had their overtime earnings. So make sure that your calculations are set up correctly to include that. Also look at your incentive programs and make sure they're in compliance with the FLSA and the overtime rules that we just discussed, and make sure that you have clearly assessed your independent contractor and employee statuses. And because we can't have employees working for us as contractors and employees, or have independent contractors out there that really should be employed by us. So make sure you consider that as well. So finally, as we wrap up, as you go up from here today, make sure that you're looking at your organization and your compensation philosophy. And when you look at your compensation philosophy, I challenge you to go back and say, what is it that you want to do in your company? I know it's a lot of information we've talked through today, but but it can all tie back into what you want to do in terms of overall comp. It's important to make sure that you look at your company values and how your pay compares to the market when you design your comp philosophy. And also ask yourself the questions to help you determine how you're going to pay. What drives performance in your company? If it's different for each organization, and so your compensation programs can help drive that performance and the behaviors. So if you have a production-based company, maybe you want to look at a piece rate program or some type of bonus incentive based on quality or performance metrics. But other companies may find a flat rate program works better for them. Look at your company and culture and determine what your performance criteria are. Also make sure that you know what's important to your employees. If you set up a pay program that's not going to be in line with the expectations, just with what your employees are looking for, just because that's the market just because that's what the market says, you may end up losing performance or losing key talent. And also determine what you want to do as a company. Work with your leaders, and all of this should be in conjunction with your leadership team to determine how your company wants to fit in the market. Do you want to lag behind the market and pay a little bit less than everybody? Do you want to meet the market and pay right at the market rate? Or do you want to lead the market and pay above what everybody else is in order to be able to attract talent? Now, each of those approaches has pros and cons, and that's for you to determine with your philosophy. Do know if you lead the market's always going to catch up with you. And so, if you pay a little bit more, then that doesn't mean somebody else won't start paying more down the road. So that's why you want to continue to evaluate your overall compensation structure. Also, make sure to consider your total rewards package as part of that. You may decide in terms of base rate, you want to pay a little less, but you've got a really awesome benefits program that you offer your employees. So tie that all back in with your total rewards as you're looking at your compensation philosophy in terms of how you want to pay and how the market fits in with your jobs. So with that, I think we have just a few minutes left, or I think we're right at time, but let's make sure we don't have any questions. If you have any, please let us know. I think we have a question in here. A cell phone stipend be considered taxable income? I will be honest, I want to look into that for you, because the cell phone stipends, there's some different practices around that, and some things have changed recently. So I want to make sure that I look at that and tell you correctly on that. But I will get you information back on that as well. And then what is considered a best practice? Merit increases based on employee performance or going by the pay grades. I find it to be a challenge as my CEO and myself view this a bit different. So that ties back in with your overall compensation philosophy for your organization. Merit increases tied to performance can also tie in with your pay grades. So I would make sure that you have those programs coincide. So really, you can use your merit increases to move your employees up through your pay grades. So I can say, for positions I've worked with and different compensation programs I've seen where you use your merit, and let's say you have a pay grade, that goes from $10 to $20, and your midpoint's 15, and you hire somebody in at 12. Well, each year that merit increase is going to push them closer to that midpoint in the market. So they really can coincide. You should go by your pay grades, though, in terms of determining where you want to bring somebody in. Do you want to bring them in lower in their range, and really use that to determine experience for your hires? So I really think it's both. I hope that helped answer that question. So do you all have any other questions today? All right, well, if you have any other questions that come up, my email address is here. We'll be sending out information on HRCI credit and SHRM credit soon. And then also we'll be sending out a survey at the end to get feedback on the presentation today. So be watching out for that in your inbox. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Mackey so she can get us wrapped up.
Okay, well, thank you so much, April. That's great information. And again, Brittany, April, or I will be available if you have any questions. And thank you again for the information. Have a great day.
Thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful day. Thanks, Brittany.
Thanks, April.
Thank you all.
Dr. Mackey, will you be able to share the recording and I can set it up for everybody?
Oh, yeah. I will send it to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Mackey. Thank you for your help today getting it all together.
Oh, you're welcome. I learned about polling more. I haven't done any in my class, but that's great.
Well, I appreciate you helping us get our polls set up.
Oh, well, good. Good.
They work great.
It did.
Yeah,
Bye.
Brittany and I were talking about that this morning. We were playing with them, trying to figure it out. So thank you for your help.
Yeah, I've done breakout rooms and I do chat, but I haven't done polling. It would still be a way I could do attendance, I think, through it. It's not as easy, but you could still see who all.
It's something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we talked about doing breakout rooms, but we weren't sure how we could incorporate that and manage it through.
Yeah.
And that was all very new to us. So we said, we'll just do a presentation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the polls work great with this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your help today.
Okay. See you later. Bye.
Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.